So welcome back everyone. So today I wanted to stream for basically a couple of hours, and I want to get back to a project that I started a few months ago, but then I had to stop due to some things that happened, and I think that now it's time to get back to it. And we are basically trying to build a mini warehouse application using Effect. So, given a lot of things have changed and a lot of new alpha and experimental packages of Effect have come out, I thought that why not try use those new packages instead of using old code and old abstraction that I built. So it's a way for me to learn more about these new experimental packages and also a way to share together how to build an Effect application. So I have already started here, I think, one Effect app by using our awesome npm create effect app package, and I've just installed the dependencies, and right now ideally I should have, as we had last time, our, for example, our structure of a monorepo with our client, domain, and server. And then we have already given like a basic application that uses the HTTP API builder that we're gonna dive through today. So what I want to start with first is like try to see what we can do in our domain package. So first thing out, I want to check out some dependencies. I want, for example, for sure to use the latest language service and install that. And that way we are using the latest version, perfect. And also I think that there is already TSX installed in our repo. So ideally, if I start a new prompt, I move to packages, and then I move into server. I think that we should have in here like a server.ts. If we run pm tsx src server, we should ideally get something that starts automatically, and it seems like so. And if we take a look at the code, this should start an HTTP server on port 3000. So let me open a browser window and check localhost 300. And if I try to hit that, we see that indeed we get something printed out. So I think that I want first to dive through what this code already does for us. So let us check what it already does. So we have three packages. The first one is domain, and I think that domain just defines the model of our application alongside the APIs that are then reused among the server and the CLI package. So here, for example, we can see that we have like /todos, and ideally it should like return an array of to-dos. So let's try to hit that endpoint in our browser. Let me just resize so I can keep it here. If I go like to-dos, okay, we get like an empty array. That's perfect. And then we may have also other methods like create, which is a post, and whatever. So let's see how we can evolve from here. So first thing, like we are building not a to-do application as we already have into our example, but we are trying to build a warehouse application. So the first thing that I want to create is like taking inspiration from these APIs we already have in here. I want to create the APIs for creating a catalog of product. So I think that I'll start by just saying, okay, I want to create a new file, and I'll call that product API.ts. So first thing we want to import from effect, we want to import schema. That schema is, as you may know, the set of APIs that allows like to describe a structure and then get automatically out of that things like encoding, decoding, and whatever, which is almost like what you can get like from, for example, things like Zod, but more powerful, because it not just gives you like the parsing, but also gives you a lot of other things like describing the structure. So you can get arbitraries, you can get encoding, decoding, you can get like hashing of the structure, you can write custom interpreters, you can get JSON schemas. And that's exactly why we need to define our things as schemas, because thanks to that, we will get also the JSON schemas for our APIs. So we start by defining a product, and we can do that by using class product extends schema dot, and here, as you can see, we want to create basically a schema dot, maybe a target class. These auto-completion you see are provided by the effect language service. So if you don't see them, it's because in your package, you need to install the effect language service. And then in your TS config, you have to say, I want to use the effect language service. And those are really useful because then I can just say, okay, I want that class, and I get automatically auto-completion for that. So we have a product, and for that product, we want name, and I'd say that we want that to be a non-empty string, because I want to make that a mandatory field. And then I think that we want also another things like description. In the description could be something that can be maybe present or not. So we can say like schema.option of a schema.string. Okay. And let me check in here. We can then see that from here, from this definition, we will get automatically things like schema.decode. We pass in our product, and then we have methods to given a structure to decode that and transform into a product. Nice. So we defined here our product structure, but again, we want exactly in the same way here it was defined like a to-do, but we want to start to define an API group that lists all of them. So we'll start by importing, I think it's from effect platform HTTP API builder. And we want here, this one. Okay. And we want to also export a class product API, which will be like the description of the APIs of our products. Extends like HTTP API builder dot, and here we start creating our API, I think. No, sorry, it's HTTP API group, not builder. Okay. From the group, we call make, and we say that these are the products API. And then here we start chaining all the API we want, right? Yeah. So we can call, for example, .add, and we add a new API. So here, for example, we want to create a new endpoint. So HTTP API endpoint, HTTP API endpoint dot make. We want that method to be something like products, right? Yeah, there we can call, instead of make, we can call something like dot get products, okay? And by taking a look at the example, we see that we need then to add the schemas either for the success or the error we want to have. For here, we want then to dot HTTP API endpoint dot add success, and then we call then add get products. Oh, right, we need to provide both the name and the URI for the API, because again, in the OpenAPI definition, we have to provide both an operation ID and an URL. So this is the operation ID, which will also get used later by the effect HTTP API client, and this is like the URL that will bake behind the scene the API. So we can see something like get all products. Okay, and now we can say add success, and we return back a schema.array of product. Okay. And this is like our API definition. We basically copied what we did here. And then we created an API group, not an API, but an API group. And then we want to create export class product API, again by extending, as we can see in the example, HTTP API.make. We call basically the base identifier API, and then we add all the APIs we want. So we can basically copy paste this and change that to be our product API product API group. We need to import HTTP API, and then we are ready. Okay. So we will keep this file for reference, but we will try to work to get all of our product APIs working. So now that we have modified our domain, we need obviously to modify our server in order to make this product API work. Because right now we have just defined again the domain, so we have just defined the description of what we expect those HTTP APIs to look like, but we have not implemented them. So let's go in here and see, for example, that here is the implementation of the APIs for like our to-dos that we have seen in the example before. So let's try to mimic that and create the same, but for our products API. So first, I think that we need to import them from template. I'm not product API. and we want like our product API. Okay, and then we can say something like host product API live equals HTTP API builder dot group products API group, a product API without group, and then we say we want like products, and then we create the handlers for them. So here we call the factor gen function star, and then in here, let me make it a little bit okay, and then here we return handlers dot handle get all products, and for now get all products will return something that is basically just stub data. So we can say something like effect.succeed, and we can then return an array of, we want like also to import our product from our domain. Did we exported the product or not? Export class product, yeah. So ideally from our product API, we should also have our products. And we can say something by return a new product, name first product, and then description. We need to import option from effect and say something like option.known. We don't want any description. And then we want to, oh yeah, there is no need to use an effect.gen in there because we are not returning nothing. So we can just remove that and say, okay, I want to return handlers dot, and that's it. This is not needed, I think. Yeah, okay. And then we also want to return a second product just to test them working. So second product, some test description. Okay. And then we need to add them into our layer. Provide product API live. We don't need the product API group. Okay. And let's stop our server and restart that. So ideally now, if we call /products, we see indeed our expected output, which is like a list. We have the first product with no description, and then we have the second product with a description. Nice. So let me roll back real quick and see what we did. Basically, the first thing we did was adding into our domain package a definition for a product. Then we created a product API group, which will group like together all the product related API. Then we created like a product API. And finally, this is like the domain shared definition that will be shared from the server and the client. And then we created like the implementation of the API over the API file by basically doing the same of our product API live. So we handled the get all product case, and for now we have just returned some stub data. Nice. So let us go further from that and let's check out more of what happens into this simple example package. So we have also in here things like our repository, and inside the repository we have in here basically an in-memory implementation of all the methods for our to-dos. And we can do the same, for example, for our product API, but that wouldn't be too much interesting. So let's try first to finish our example. We have defined like a server API. Now let's try to see how we can, like, for example, call that API from a client. So that is performed, I think, into the CLI package. But again, I want to create a browser application, not a CLI. So you would say that's not useful. Well, that's true, but still inside the CLI code, we have the code to create and consume a client for our API. For example, you can see here, we create an HTTP client API for our API, giving them the base URL, and then we get automatically methods to call over the APIs to get all the stuff we need. So let's try to do the same as a test into our server package. So let's check. Here we can do something like the server, create a new test client. Maybe in the tests, we can like modify the dummy test and say, okay, first of all, I want to import from template domain from our product API. We want to import the product API. And then we also want to import from effect platform what's called an HTTP API client. Okay, and here we are using effect Vitas that allows us to, instead of just passing regular function, we should also be able to do things like effect.gem. We need to import effect from effect. Effect.gem. And we can say something like, first we create our client, which will be something like we yield HTTP API client dot make, and we need to pass in our product API, and then we say also the base URL is HTTP localhost 3000. Okay. What are you complaining for? Oh yeah, first of all, we have created something that, as you can see, requires like it's first like returning an effect that requires into the environment an HTTP client. So we need to provide an HTTP client. So in order to do that, we can import from effect platform node HTTP node HTTP client, and then say pipe effect dot provide a node HTTP client dot layer, and that will satisfy our effect. And then we can also like effect dot run promise this test. So that way we get our client that will call our live APIs, and then we can say something like we get all the list of the products, which will be something like yielding star client.products.get all products. As you can see, there is like no parameters for that. And then we get back the list of our products. So we can say we expect products.length, for example, to equal 2, because we had like 2 products in our API. So let's try with our server up and running. So we have seen that we are indeed returning the correct result we expect. So let's try to see if we run the tests, what we get back. So npm test. Okay, we get, oh yeah, that's why, because we are calling, template domain product API. Yeah, we need first like to npm build, and that will build our package. And then if we do npm test, I think that, yeah, we get our test passing. If we, for example, change that to expect 3, we'll see that it will fail because we expected 2 to deeply equal 3. That's not true. Nice. And I think that with effect vtest, we should also apply the ability to return an effect instead of, sorry. Yeah, that's the case. And with that, we can assume that our APIs are being hit and they are working indeed. Nice. So this like creates a sample client and works, but let's try to evolve from that and start creating more APIs. So we'll move into our domain package and go back to our product API. So let me just drink real quick. Okay. So let me check one thing real quick. Okay. So here, ideally, okay. So here we are running our test, and I was saying before that by using effect vtest, we should be able to do something like it.effect, I think, yeah. And instead of doing that, we can do the nicer way, which is like to provide an effect directly, right? Test function. Oh yeah, it's still a lazy effect. Okay, but here we then don't need to call like we don't need to call like run promise. Instead, like the test will now be tied to effect, and the effect will be run by the test runner. So that way, when we have something that breaks, we will get like nicer error than the one we had before. Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to fix. So before moving on, another thing that I would like to fix as well is like, I don't like this template namespace. So I want to look up for wherever that is defined. Okay, and I want to rename these to something like add warehouse, and I want to change this only in the JSON and the TypeScript files, I think. Yeah. So here we can say files to include .json and yes. So we exclude that and then we replace. Okay. Now it will complain, I think, because before figuring that out, we need like first to interrupt and interrupt here again. Okay. So here TypeScript figured it out that we replaced and it's fine with that. Let me check that now we have at warehouse server. Nice. And then we can also try again to run pnpm check to see that indeed everything is fine. Then rebuild again. And everything is fine. Nice. Okay, so let's get back to our product APIs. So I want to add also things like export const product ID and say that the product ID, maybe export class product ID extends like schema dot class product ID and use like a value schema dot below empty string, and then like use in here product ID. Sorry, schema non-empty string and just string. Okay, and ID we have a product ID. Okay, that way we see that now we need to provide in here in our API a product ID as well, and we can say something like ID new product ID value 1. Okay, and the same goes for the second one. Product ID is 2. Okay. If we stop and restart our server, now we should get updated output for that. Nice. And our tests should be fine as well. Oh, what did we break? Failed to load. Oh, okay. Failed to load warehouse domain product API. Okay. So let's check. Why did Vitest fail like to solve for the package? Let's check into Vitest if there are something like names are coded. I see an alias, but yeah, it already aliases. Clean domain test. Okay, let's try to run that again. Favorite warehouse domain product API resolver ID warehouse domain product API in okay. So let's see. Oh, I know why. We probably need. Yeah, we probably need like to destroy and reinstall because we changed like the name of the packages and like the npm install. Like given we have destroyed the, we have changed the name of the packages, we have basically broken symlinks for the packages, I think. Let me check if that's the case. Okay, npm build. That works. And then we have also PNPL test. Transport error. Oh, because I stopped the server. But if we run now, we are past. Okay, so we have fixed that, and now we have a nicer name. Okay, so let's go back to our product API. And I would like to add a new API to say something like HTTP API endpoint dot post create product, and I want that to be over there, product, and I want to add success, and in case that we call that and it succeeds, I want to get back the whole product, and in case to be able to create a product, we need like a payload, which is basically the fields that are allowed to be used inside of the creation of the product. So we can say that that is basically like create product payload is something like schema.omit we could use from product. We can basically omit fields. Sorry, it's the opposite. We need first like the fields ID from product, right? Schema.omit. Let's go check this type signature. We want a list of keys. Oh, has to be used like product dot type schema with ID. Yes. And these will get basically back whatever we want except like the ID. Okay, that may seem one way to do that, and for now we will do that, but I'll show you why that's not great to do that. And there is also like a method to set the payload, and the payload is our create product payload. Okay. And then what also do you want? Access, okay, and that's fine. What are we? Oh, we are passing this one instead of there, add, and here. Okay. Okay. So now that we have defined create products, we can go back to our API server. You can see that now it went to an error, and that's because I think that we need also to call .handle create product, and that is like the request we get. And here, for now, we can say something like effect.log, maybe fair.gen, function star, and inside of that, we yield effect.log, and we have request.payload, which will be our payload request, and then we have something like return new products with ID. Will make product new product ID with the value 1 fixed for now. Again, we are only trying to stub that out, and then we want to pass request.payload as additional data. So I should have ideally Postman installed on this machine. Let me check real quick again. Unfortunately, I am slowly creating my machine right now. Okay, so this is Postman. So ideally, if we call post over, zoom in. Yeah, I want to update later. Okay, if we try to say something like HTTP localhost 3000 products. Okay, and as body we want like row JSON, not JavaScript, JSON. If we pass something that's malformed, ideally we get the o/products, and let me check because it's API products. It's not that, because behind the scene, if we take a look at that, it's a post, it's products, and did we like add it to the live APIs? Yes. Create product. Okay, that should do it. And let me check here again. 3000. Okay. Should get the list of products. Let's try to add another test. Let's say something like products dot create product, one name for payload, the name, my new product, and description, known. And we need to import option as well. Okay. As you can see, this is what I was trying to say before. This is not ideal because it won't tag right now. So that's not great, but we can change that, because instead of like doing this of creating like the creation field from that, we can still meet like tag in here, and then we are okay, and then we expect our product dot name to equal my new product. So if that passes, that means that we have created that. We have yielded something that's not intermediate value is not iterable. Should create a product. Okay, that's fine. And then what are you complaining about? This returns a fact. We are yielding a fact. We get the product, and then we expect the product.name to equal our product. The server is running. Check. If we rerun, we get failed. Oh, I see what. Let me check. Maybe. No, that's fine. We set product.post / product. We set the payload. Let's see by looking at the other one what we do. Set payload. Okay, that's fine. We had the success, and then we set the payload. Okay, and then we do something like that. Okay, so this ideally should work exactly as our /to-dos. Let's try to hit like /to-dos and send. Okay, that works as expected, to-dos. So did I do something dumb? Post product, not products. Did I type in there products before? No. HTTP products. Okay. Oh, I need to restart the server because I changed the name. Yeah. And try again. Yeah. So I was doing something dumb. I put in there the wrong name and that I didn't restart the server. So as you can see here, this is fully type safe because it returned me back a bad request error saying that we are missing the name field. So if we say something like name test, okay, and then we want to give like the description, and we'll see that passing null is not valid because we want an option encoded. So that is expected because if we look at like the signature of schema.option and we go to the option, we see that the option encoded it's not exactly what we would expect. We want like optional, and this should return a property that if omitted, it passes anyway. So let's try again. Start the server, restart, and call that without the description. Yeah, it works because we have now marked our description as an optional. And if we instead provide like a description, hello, it works as well. Nice. Okay, so this is how we define like a create product API. That's nice. And I think that the only thing, oh, this is now not true anymore because if we want to pass a description, then we pass just the description entirely. And again, if we quit and restart our tests, maybe after that we have after we have like built all of our shared packages. Description, what are you complaining for? SRC API, yeah, that's what, oh yeah, that's what we are fixing right now. Here, we don't need option anymore. Okay. Okay, that built. Now if we run again the test, they should ideally, once we have built, pass. Let me check. Here, what you expected? You expected an option, but string undefined, expecting string, but we gave an option instead. And if we go to our test, that's true. We wanted here to do something like that, and that should work. Let me check. Let me rerun again. Okay. We got a decode error, yeah, because we need like again to start and run again, I think. Okay, and that there it is. So I think that I'll also need to check out more about this monorepo setup because also trying to restart again every time we change the DOM in the server is not a great experience. I think that we should have in there something like a watch mode. If not, we should. Let me try. If we do something like build watch, does it work in a watch mode? No. Oh no, because it will pass in there. Yeah. Okay, for now that's fine. We can like trigger them manually. So going further, again, we'll go back to our product API. So we have seen how to define them by using HTTP API Builder, and I think one of the greatest thing of HTTP API is that ideally they should give you back like an OpenAPI description of your APIs, I think. So I think that if we have a look, we should have something like an OpenAPI from our package. We should have in here in platform, we should have something like OpenAPI, I think, yes. And then I think that in this module, there should be something that helps you build the OpenAPI for from API, and then we need like to pass an API live. No, sorry, and product API, right? It's like, let's try to do that. Let's do that on the other file we were working with for in our API, yeah. If we import from here, OpenAPI, does it allow us to OpenAPI spec equals OpenAPI from API, and then we pass in something like product API. Yes. And then does it means that we can like, for example, console.plug those? And if we try to, for example, stop the server and start again, does it start by outputting them? Yes, 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 yes. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And I think that maybe there is also like a way for making them hosted. Let's see. We can say something like we can like create a route that returns the spec. Maybe that could be like something. But yeah, I think that for now it's enough knowing that that works as I expected. Okay, so that's something new I learned today. Okay, so now we have built few methods over our APIs. So we can start by getting rid of these to-dos APIs we don't care about anymore. Move to trash, and that's it. And the same goes in here. To-do repository we don't want. Move to trash. Into the server, we remove the to-do repository. We do not have that before. And then we save, and in our API, we remove the to-do repository, we remove the to-do APIs, and that's it. Okay. And API live is now just HTTP API builder dot API, and we pass like, instead of to-dos API, our product API. Okay. Okay. So these should still work, and we should have like removed from our packages our to-do API. Yeah, I think that we can remove completely this to-do client. We don't want that. For now, as I mentioned before, a CLI would be out of the scope of what I want to build. So I think that we can nuke altogether this CLI folder. And that means also that we need to change few settings because there are still like references to the CLI project here and there. And then let me check where they are. Where else we have in the TS config, we should remove them. Okay. And here as well. And here in the references. Okay. And I think that we are golden. Yeah. So again, let's try to build again everything to ensure that it works. We stop our HTTP server. We stop our tests. Okay, build succeeded. So we run again server. We run again tests. Okay, and everything passes, and now we don't have like our CLI anymore. Perfect. Okay, so let's go further from here. I'd say that one thing we can do is then like model things in a better way. So I don't like much this thing of having like APIs and domain models in the same like things in the same folder. So let's first like describe all of our entities in here and then evolve from that. So first of all, we want to create like a user model. And again, import schema from fact export plus user extends schema dot that's an interesting bug. Oh, I need why. I know why. Yeah, that's a bug I need to fix into the language service. Basically, it needs like to properly shut down. And we were seeing like user schema.class, and we want the user to have something like an email schema. We have like an empty string. Okay. And then we would also have something like name schema dot empty string and surname schema not empty string. Okay, I want those fields to be mandatory. And then we can say something like host user ID equals schema UUID. Yeah, that's fine by me. Dot pipe or schema dot brand, and we can say the brand is like user ID. And then we'll create like a schema dot brand of user ID. That means that we should have also like APIs like user ID.make. We start from that, but we get a string that's branded as user ID. Perfect. We want to export that as well. Okay. And again, we want our user to have the ID as well in our fields. So ID, email, name, and surname. Perfect. Okay, so let's see from here what we can do. We can, for example, try to define APIs for that. For example, we can try to define a Synap API. A Synap API will basically like create the user and authenticate the user. So we want import from platform. We want to import HTTP API group. Okay. And then we want to create things like export first user API. We can extends HTTP API group dot make users, and then we want to add, and we want like to create an HTTP API endpoint, and the HTTP API endpoint will be something like Synap. So HTTP API endpoint dot post Synap, and I want that to be sign up, and then we want like to set the payload of that to be like a user sign up request data that we need to create, and say something like export class sign up request that extends schema class. As a sign up data, we want basically the email, schema non-empty string, name, schema non-empty string, and surname, schema non-empty string. Non-empty string. Okay, you can see here that we have basically duplicated things that maybe we don't want to duplicate. So one thing that I usually do is something like const required user fields equals, and then I basically move them into here, and then what you can do is like say spread them required user fields and like required user fields. Or in this case, since this is like data that we require upon sign up, we can also use like the fields that is exposed by that class. So we can say something like user sign up request data.fields, and that is basically the same that we have defined before. Okay, so we want like an email, a name, and a surname. And I'll call that basically user sign up request data. And I'd like also to have like the birthday, schema dot date. Okay. Okay, and upon like signing up, I could see many kind of errors incoming. I could see something like export user already signed up error. which will extend a schema error, and we will like add error user already signed up error. And then we will also have things like, let me think. We will definitely have more like specific description than just these ones. But yeah, we can evolve from that slowly but surely. So let's try to implement those APIs. So I don't want to implement them into our API file. I want like to have something like new user service .ts, and I want to have things like import from effect. I want effect, and I'll say export as user service extends effect.service, and we want like to effect.gen function store, and then here we will implement some methods for our application. So first we will require the user definition we have done before from warehouse domain user. We will import like the user sign up request data. And then we will have also the user. And then we can say something like function sign up of email media and like user sign up data. And here we want to do something and then eventually return either our signed up user or like the error that we have defined before. So maybe we can also like use const sign up equals effect.fn function star data blah 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 return sign up. Okay. So here we can say something like we want an SQL connection, for example. So let me check, do we have in our packages on server like effect SQL? No, we don't. So we can like effect SQL latest, and then effect SQLite, I think it's called, yeah. And we want like loading. Is it called SQLite? Let me check real quick. SQLite node. And we want the latest for that as well. So let me npm install my new packages in here. Okay, done. And now we should ideally be able to see something like import from effect SQL and SQL connection. Yes. So we could say something like connection +* SQL connection dot sConnection, and this will give us back a connection. And then we can do here, for example, things like a yield star connection dot execute, and here we can, for example, can execute row SQL queries and then get them back with data. Perfect. Okay, so this will be our user service. I think that we could do something like upon creation of this service, we can like create the table, the users table, if not exists yet. Okay. And then we could like remove that. Okay, and then we can say something like yield star connection dot execute, and then here we put our SQL statement like create table users if not exist. I need to check up the SQLite syntax because already I don't remember. Yeah, create table if not exists. Users, and we say something like ID is text primary key, and then we have other fields that are like in user we have like name, surname, and birthday, email, name, surname, and birthday. So email, text, surname, text, name, text as well, name, surname, and then we have also birthday. Birthday. Okay, and SQLite, I think it's like date time. Yeah, date should work, yeah. And there are like 3 arguments. We have the string, the parameters, and also transform rows. Oh, we are using like the internal like API. Yeah, that's not what I wanted to use. I wanted to use like the other one. So let me check, but it should be internal. It should be in here. Let me give a moment. I have like a message reply. Okay. I was saying, yeah, I want like here, I want okay. Client, I want this. Oh, it's not SQL connection. It's, I think, SQL client. Okay, now makes more sense. SQL client, not SQL client. Okay, and this is our client. And our client as things like client dot yeah, exactly. And these have few methods. For example, I get save, yeah, and gets back a statement of a row. Yeah. So I was saying things like oops, clients dot on dialect, and then we could say something like oh, this requires all dialect. Yeah. So yeah, client dot safe should be more than enough. And this not safe. It's like how it's called. I think that's like execute, right? Name, join, length. This gets reactive. I don't remember. On direct or else. And these take yeah, okay. We can say for now or else and then just okay. So this is basically we are supporting only SQLite for now, and we'll run that, okay? And then what we can also do is the same like for like inserting and getting values, because then we can say like on sign up we can say things like in star client SQL or else and then provide our text saying insert into users, and we will pass in an email, a name, a surname, birthday, values, and here we will pass in like data dot email, data dot name, and data dot surname, data dot birthday, and these like effect.fn, we run that, and this is like what there or else, this like returns the string, and then we need like to yield this, I think, right? Yeah. This gives you back the string, okay? And then we like dot. It's like, isn't like dot. Let me check real quick examples for affect SQL, because every time I forget how the syntax is. So it should be like packages, affect SQL, and test client. And we go, for example, to affect SQLite node, test client. Oh yeah. When we get back the SQL client, we can just do things like this is client, but if we do like client, that actually execute this. Yeah. So this can be called like SQL. And here we can do things like SQL and that. And this will get me back a statement of a row. Nice. Okay. So this variable is never signed. That's okay. And this we then need to yield this in order to execute it. Okay, so let me remove instance to users. These are the fields, the values, and these are the values, and that's it. Okay, so then we return nothing for now. Let's just test if this works as we expect, because we want, like in our test, to do something like fact creates a user. Okay. Function star. We want like our user service. Like warehouse server, user service, user service, user service dot. Okay, and this will give back our user service, and then we can do something like yield start user service dot sign up the service. Okay, and that will get back on, and then we can say dot sign up. Okay, and our request data will be like email test@test.com, name, TN, surname, and birthday, and then we take whatever. Okay, so now you know when my birthday is. So ideally, these will fail because this, in order like to run, requires an user service to be provided, and here it's not provided. So we can like .type if fed.provide, and we say that our test layer is just like user service dot the default implementation, and we do layer dot provide, and we will import from fact SQLite node SQLite client dot layer, and we want like file name db dot mydb.db, and we will provide our test layer to our tests. And ideally, I think that this should work. I think. Let me quit, and again, npm install, npm build, and like stop and only run this test. Failed to load URL. Oh, again, same issue as before. Warehouse server user service. Let me reload again. Why don't you want like to properly resolve? And this caching is like killing me. Okay. If we look at server dist, we have a user service. So what are you complaining about? It's like vdist user match config, no, and uses like the shared one that uses domain and server. Yeah, so you should be happy, but you aren't. Let's check why are not you happy? Why are not you happy? You want a user service and you are not able to import it, right? Federal warehouse server user service, yeah, that comes from this package. Does it works if you if we clean and rebuild? No. What do you want? Failed to load warehouse users server user service, and we have it here in our dist folder. And shouldn't like when you alias takes like packages name and then you press test dist equals undefined. Yeah, you should use src ideally, as I can see here, because you should alias my package. What I don't see is like it doesn't seem to alias everything, just slash test. And let me check real quick. If I have, for example, in here, if I resolve directly from here, like src user service, okay. Okay, but at least like cannot read properties of undefined, meaning synap, user service. Oh, because we forgot to yield, and that's why yield star. Okay, now we are rolling. Okay, and then SQL can only be number, string, begin, buffer, and nulls. Okay, that's expected because what I wanted to see is that I put in there like birthday, which is like a date, but if we say something like to result string, okay, now it works. Okay, I need only to figure out why the setup isn't like aliasing and resolving properly. The folder itself, let me check real quick one thing. From dir name packages, the name of the package, which is domain, and then target, this should be as RC, yeah. Oh, I know what. I know what could be. From warehouse server dot. No, I need to check this setup because I expect this to work, but it doesn't. Yeah. So what time is it? Oh yeah, it's almost like time to go for me. I need to investigate more this setup. I'm not too familiar with it, but yeah. And then, yeah, we can like fix this. Yes. But again, we should have like mydb.db, and I should have like an SQLite viewer, if I remember. It's this one, yeah. And if we go here and say SQLite, open database, MyDB, SQLite, users, and we can see that indeed we have our data that we have triggered with our tests. Okay, so I think that it's almost time for me to start making lunch for today, but I want to explore more about why this setup is not completely behaving as I would expect at warehouse server user service. Yes. Oh, alias. Oh, alias. Let me add one test real quick. If I do something like warehouse, okay, and then quit, and then run again. Oh, that's it. That's definitely it. This alias function, it's taking like name, yeah. And if I remove that, it won't work, right? Yeah, because it's expecting like the whole beginning of the package name, yeah. So we expect it to be at warehouse. Maybe it's not working because no, we removed like the template reference. Yeah, so if we search like for template, yeah, we have removed that from everywhere. Yeah, so we need to fix that resolution to be something like at warehouse domain at warehouse server. Okay, and that also means that ideally that should get me if you rely on TypeScript config pass through solve module, please install. Oh, can find module imported from product domain API. Now I'm getting the same thing with the other one. If you're relying on TypeScript config path through, please install the. Oh, made the plugin under the resolution. Oh, okay. We could try that. npm install this. Yep. Yeah, I want to do that not into my this config paths here, and I'll get the latest one 5.14. Okay. Okay, so pm test. Okay, cannot find browse domain product API. Browse domain test. So why is it that I'm doing something silly here, I think. So why should that be different from alias? I don't know why that is different from what I did before. Maybe I did again something silly. But yeah. So ideally now they are both pointing into like the sources directory. That means that ideally if I use something like in the test, for example, here I used like user sign up, okay? And if I like change something from the user, like removing a field, that should be like immediately seen. Oh yeah, it's not used, but that should be like seen by the tests, right? Yeah, they are indeed. Okay. So let's move on and say we want now to make things nicer. So definitely we cannot do something like that. We need to do something like in a more like smart way than that. So there should be transaction. Yeah, and SQL with transaction basically runs an entire effect with the transaction. So we can like do SQL with transaction, and now we are running like this effect with the transaction. And then we can do something like const existing user for email equals cl star SQL and try to then get select to name from users where email equal, and we'll get our data.email. The existing length. Ideally, this should return me an array of rows, and we can say if is more than 0, then we can say something like yield star fact fail new user already synced up error, and we should get that exactly in our tests. Perfect. So that way, before inserting a user, we check if it already exists. If it already exists, we fail, and if not, we insert the data. Okay. And maybe calling this like sign up is too much. We maybe want to call this like add user. Okay. And this can be something like rename symbol. Let's go to session. And so instead of user already signed up, we can say like user email already taken error. And we can provide like the email or a string, or say like message the email. Okay. Okay, so in the constructor, now we are missing the email. Okay, but we see that test.test.com is already taken perfectly. If we like completely destroy our DB and rerun test again, we pass perfectly. Okay, so we have like added the user. We can also say something like we will like try to authenticate with the users. So the first thing that we may want to do is like for sure have a way of performing some kind of like logging and whatever. But yeah, for now, maybe let's like rename this as a user. Since I'm running out of time, and we will get back to this later, I think that for now we can like stop here, and we need like to update this because it's called add user. Okay, and I think that we can also say memory file name, and that's it, right? Yeah. And I think that for tests we can say something like we could say like that for tests we could make empty db equals effect.gen function star rules like file system, and we can import file system real star file system and then we walk like const temp dir equals seal star make temp directory scoped. Does that create temporary says scope, but the directory will be automatically deleted when the scope is closed. Nice. So we can like make a temporary directory, and then we can say like return SQLite client dot make, and file name can be like temp dir dot test db. So that will make like we use the file system API to make a temporary directory. We'll create then a temporary DB in that, and then we want like all of these to be to have like a provide, and we want, I think, both the file system. That's it, I think. That's all you want. Yes. Oh yeah, that is an effect, so we need to yield that. I expect this to be an effect that returns as SQL client. May fail with platform error and requires both a scope and reactivity. Reactivity. I think that reactivity should come from another package. Fact experimental, I think. Packages server. Yeah. Mental latest. Yeah. And then we pnpl install. Okay, and now we should have reactivity layer, and these will like create an empty DB. That's nice. Hey, are you going to use RPC or only REST API? Sorry, just seeing the message right now. I think that I'll start by using like the API package, and I have already in mind some part of the application that will require using like the RPC API in order to communicate between them. Not with the final application itself, but with internals of the application. But we'll see again. It's like something that we're experimenting. We are trying to learn new effect packages that are right now in a kind of experimental state. And so yeah, that would be the case. Probably there will be definitely part using effect RPC. So again, now we have an effect that returns an SQLite client and like using a platform error and the scope. Okay. And then we want like to make these a layer. So layer dot effect SQLite client. Oh yeah, sorry, I could do that in here. Instead of that, we can do this. here and layer. This is an effect, and we also need to provide make MTTP, and this is like SQL client dot SQL client, and the test is now scoped. SQL client. Right client. No, sorry, it's SQL client. Yeah. Okay. So now it should work exactly as before. Let me check real quick. Okay, but now every time we run, the database will be dropped and created again from scratch. So that's exactly what we're looking for. And we can delete this file and it won't be recreated. Okay. So that seems more like a more reasonable setup for our application. And then let's go back and go back to our definition. Okay. So here we have a user, and we probably really want also like a method that, given a user ID, fetches back a single user. So const find the user by ID fact.fn function star user ID will be a user ID. We need to define that later. So string for now, and we'll say something like const user equals will star SQL now select everything from users where ID equals our user ID. And we'll say if users dot length is less than, it's not equal than 1, we'll say something like return. Why not in MemoryDB? Yeah, sure. In MemoryDB can be also another option. I prefer personally to use like file system based one, but yeah. Return effect.fail new, and we want to add to our user an error that says something like export plus no such user error schema tagged error, and we'll pass in the user ID, which is user ID. And we'll also export type user ID equals schema.type of type of user ID. Okay, so now we can import our user ID. We can take in here our user ID. This is a string branded, and then we can say no such user error user ID, and then if we found that, you could say things like return user dot default, and we passed in users 0, and return yield star user dot decode. So what is user? User needs to be imported. Okay, And why isn't there the code method? Because we didn't find that, and we want static the code unknown equals schema dot the code unknown user. And so we can do the code unknown from this user. Okay. And we can return the API find user by ID. Okay. We can also move our user.test.yes, and we can like pick in there all the things we need for the user test. We look at these. We definitely need the imports. And we need like our test. Okay. And then we can remove like unneeded imports. Here we, for example, expect to expect the user. Oh no, it's void. Yeah, because we need to do that later. But yeah, we need like to test a little bit more. Then we have we don't need the API client for these tests. In dummy, we removed everything that is related to that. For that reactivity we don't need. Layer we don't need. Okay. And that's fine. And we have only few things. Oh yeah, that failed because I have stopped my server. If I start my server and run all of my tests, they all passes. Nice. Okay, so here we stop again. And let's do the last thing before going back to lunch. So we have user tests. We say that we should create a user, and then we say like we get a user ID, and we can use something like UUIDs for the user ID, I think. So SQ. So let me check real quick. UUID v4 should be fine. So yeah, we can add like into our package npm. We'll install in here dependencies UUID. The latest one is 1110. Nice. Okay. And then we want into the user service import from UUID UUID. Oh yeah, it does not have types. Yeah. Oh no, it's not installed. Install. Okay. Load. v4 UUID v4, and then we could say that equals user ID equals user ID dot make from a UUID v4, and then we say also ID user ID, and then since we already have this method that find a user by ID, we could just say, okay, since we expect this to happen, we are okay with an additional round trip and return yield star find user by ID, user ID, hide, effect, or catch. And we want to catch the if the error is like catch tag, if the error is like an user, no such user error. Oh yeah, we need like to yield. That's why I don't see that. Okay. If the error is a no such user error, then we want like to fail. So catch tag, no such user error, or maybe better, no such user error dot tag. In case we do that, we do effect or die. Okay, I have too many. Okay. Okay, so that way we basically get back the user. There it is. And we basically say if we get no such user error, we die because we already have just inserted right now the user. So that's kind of a fatal issue if we perform the query, but there is no user in the database. So that means that either find user by ID is bugged or we have issues with our DBs. So this will get like a parse error, a scanner error, or a user email already taken error. So back to our tests. In here, we can say something like in here, create a user, and then we expect given the user, we expect user dot ID to not would be to be false. Okay, and if we try again our tests, we failed. Oh, tag is missing, right? Because I used like a tagged class, but obviously the tag doesn't come from the DB. So in the user service, instead of default unknown, we can like user.make, I think, and then like, oh, but this will like fail, yeah. So it's better to just say tag is like the user dot tag, and then we have like all the data from the user. Dirty, but should work. Yeah, it creates a user and it works. And again, we should have like our HTTP server stopped. But again, if I run, okay, all of my tests are now running and passing. Nice. Okay, so I think that for today that's enough because I have again to go start making lunch. But yeah, today we have like had a look at the quick example repository that comes from the Create Effect app, and we also had like a look at building like a user service that persists users into a DB. And for now, I think that we're fine. Next time we will move on and do more stuff like performing APIs to insert a user, do authentication and whatever. But for now, at least we have built the basic of the storage we need to do that. So again, thank you everyone for your time. Sorry if my voice today was like not great, but I have a bit of throat itch. But yeah, thank you very much for joining. See you next time. Bye.